Human rights are not a partisan or political issue. There is no gray area when it comes to fundamental rights and freedoms. They cannot be negotiated or manipulated to achieve narrow political interests. Dear friends, it is an honor to be here with you today. I am humbled to be speaking to the audience we have in this room today. This room is filled with courageous individuals who have made personal choice and made significant personal sacrifices to fight and defend these very same protections for our fundamental human rights. This year, we commemorate the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This declaration presents a bold vision of a world where every person is born free and lives with equality in dignity and rights. It imagines a world without tyranny, without fear, without hate. The Declaration outlines a basic quality of life to which all people are entitled to their life, liberty, and security of the person, and provides people the tools to make that a reality, a world where human rights and freedom for all individuals are granted. This is not to say that we have achieved all of these things. In reality, there are still too many people in this world who are suffering from inequality and exclusion. People who do not have access to justice, who live under tyranny and are lacking protections for their basic civil, political, economic, and social rights. By outlining this clear set of rights and obligations, we have given ourselves the responsibility to work consistently and diligently to make these 30 articles a daily reality for all people. Our ethical and moral values mean nothing if we do not. I stand before you represent the Organization of American States, an institution that is grounded in its commitment to democracy and human rights. This year also marks the 70th anniversary of the American Declaration of the Rights and Duty of the Man, the foundation of our inter-American human rights system. At the same conference in 1948, the founding charter of the OAS was adopted, wherein American states proclaim the fundamental rights of the individual as their guiding principles. It goes on to declare that the true significance of American solidarity and good neighborliness can only mean the consolidation on this continent within the framework of democratic institutions, of a system of individual liberty and social justice based on respect for the essential rights of man, recognizing the essential role of democracy in guaranteeing these rights. The very notion of democracy centers on the people and views all peoples as politically equals. Therefore, each and every person is entitled to enjoy the free and full exercise of their inalienable rights and freedoms without discrimination. When I assumed the role of Secretary General, I had come to this organization with the motto of more rights for more people, inequality of opportunities, and the poverty situation of millions of inhabitants in the Western Hemisphere, especially those in vulnerable situations, have a marked impact on welfare, political stability, and democratic governance. By addressing the structural factors that condition economic and social inequalities, exclusion, poverty, and extreme poverty in the Americas, we are working to achieve more democratic, just, and equitable societies, thereby strengthening our democracies for future generations. We must strive to eliminate discrimination, injustice, and inequality in order to focus on the heart of our democracies, our people. Unfortunately, the courage to stand up for this truth and to defend democracy and human rights is not something that can be taken for granted. Those of you here today know that better than most. Silence, in many cases, means complicity. For some, it implies that they don't want voices to break the silence that provides impunity. And unfortunately, this is a trap that the international community frequently falls into. When I first spoke up against the situation in Venezuela, the world was shocked. I was criticized for my stance for drawing attention to the alarming actions to dismantle democracy in Venezuela. As Secretary General, I was accused of belligerence for denouncing the extensive human rights violation and the elimination of democratic institutions in Venezuela. I wasn't acting diplomatically, it was said. The absurdity of all this being that the so-called belligerence was not tied to the murder of hundreds of protesters, the thousands of extrajudicial killings, or the countless and needless deaths of Venezuelans as a result of man-made humanitarian crisis. The belligerence was directed, apparently and ironically, at the denunciation of these crimes. My efforts were described as inappropriate and overstepping the authority of this office, none of which was true. As Secretary General, it is my responsibility to be a champion for the rights and principles that this organization stands for. I must be a voice of those without a voice and those most discriminated against, a voice of those who suffer inequality and suffer from the lack of protection for their rights. I must be the staunchest defender of those rights. Today, the OAS is still the only multilateral organization to have spoken clearly and loudly about the crisis in Venezuela. Venezuela did not become a dictatorship overnight. It happened over many years, with one democratically elected government so desperate to cling to power that it dismantled its democratic institutions one by one. Since taking over power, Nicolás Maduro has installed a corrupt and criminal government whose only concern is consolidating their power and stealing the country's wealth. Access to basic necessities of life is controlled by political affiliation, and questioning those in power is risking your life. Maduro has eliminated the rule of law and made authoritarianism the rule, twisting the meaning of regional solidarity. The international community clung to the notion of non-intervention to justify looking the other way when this power-hungry regime eliminated the rights of their citizens. A high price has been paid to learn the cost of silence and inaction, and it is the people of Venezuela who are suffering the consequences for this silence and our loss of integrity. The hesitance to raise their voices and hold the Maduro regime to account has allowed Venezuela to deteriorate into the corrupt, authoritarian, failed state we see today. More than 12,000 citizens have been detained in Venezuela since 2014. More than 150 have been killed in protests. One of the most chilling statistics is that since 2012, there have been more than 6,300 extrajudicial killings have taken place at the hands of government agents under the ironically named Operation Freedom and Protection, an operation designed to terrorize the population. Corruption and mismanagement have led to one of the greatest self-made humanitarian crises we have experienced in the Americas. There are now massive shortages of food and medical supplies that have caused far-reaching consequences. The number of undernourished people in Venezuela has jumped by 1.3 million people in the last 2 years. Close to 5 million people can only find enough for 1 meal a day, and every day between 5 and 6 children die of malnutrition. Maternal deaths have risen by 66% because there are no medical supplies to provide some of the most basic treatments, and in 2016, 7 died every day before reaching the age of 1. The government continues to deny that there is a humanitarian crisis and has repeatedly rejected all of the international system, turning a blind eye to the death and destruction that their corruption has caused. All the while, widespread corruption continues, and millions upon millions of stolen dollars continue to flow in the personal bank accounts of those very people who are responsible for this crisis. All efforts for dialogue to find a peaceful solution have failed over and over and over. Instead, each time the regime has used dialogue as a smoke screen to further consolidate some aspect of their dictatorship. In 2014, Maduro consolidated his position, a new status quo where political prisoners were a reality and the branches of government were co-opted. In 2016, they eliminated the recall referendum. In 2017, they created and consolidated the illegal National Constituent Assembly. The recent failed dialogue in the Dominican Republic enabled the regime to launch their spurious presidential election. There is no legitimacy to this election. Maduro has already stolen it. The international community must use every tool available to them to bring an end to this oppression. Sanctions are the strongest diplomatic tool we have, and so I call on states to introduce more, broader, and tougher sanctions against this regime. Sanctions will not hurt the people of Venezuela. It hurts the personal pocketbooks of those siphoning off money from what is left of the country's resources. The worst possible sanction for the Venezuelan people would be 6 more years of repression and dictatorship, of hunger, sickness, and the deprivation of their human rights. That is the only guarantee that Maduro brings. This government does not care about the suffering of its people. They are directly responsible for it. Venezuela has become a failed state. It is a threat to international peace and security. No member state of the OAS or of the United Nations can ignore what is happening in Venezuela or be complacent about the trampling of its people's human rights. At the OAS, we're using every tool available to us to help address the crisis. We have invoked the Inter-American Democratic Charter. We have created a process to analyze whether or not crimes against humanity have taken place in Venezuela. We welcome the ICC announcement opening a preliminary examination into the situation in Venezuela. The information that our team at the OAS has gathered is shocking. We cannot allow this impunity to continue. Although the United Nations does not have a democratic charter, it does have 3 pillars that constitute the purposes for which that organization exists: to maintain international peace and security, development, and human rights. The greater the number of voices condemning this abhorrent dictatorship, the closer we will be to ending it and restoring Venezuelans their liberties. No democratic country can be complicit, nor can be their leaders and representatives, or any multilateral forum. Silence, methodological or procedural excuses, absences, and convoluted languages are the main reasons that the Venezuelan regime is still in power. No political, legal, or economic argument can justify going along with its murderous dictatorship. A Uruguayan politician named Wilson Ferreira, who has been an inspiration to me through much of my career, when the dictatorship was about to dissolve parliament in 1973, he spoke timeless words that ring true today. It is said that tyrants and their accomplices will be judged by history, and this is true. However, before that, the people will make them accountable and responsible for their actions. In today's world, new technologies, better and broader access to education, people are becoming more and more empowered to speak their minds and demand their rights. It is imperative that governments take heed of the people's concerns and address them. The regime in Venezuela thinks that jailing the opposition, murdering their critics, closing the civic space, shutting down the media, that they can control the narrative and act with impunity. They are wrong. It is because of countless brave Venezuelans, human rights defenders and human rights freedom fighters, people that belong here in this room among us today, people like you, that we know the truth about what is happening in Venezuela. We make sure that we hold this regime to account. It is their bravery that inspires me every day to keep fighting to uphold our commitments to the rights and freedoms that we have enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the American Declaration of the Rights and Duties of Man. Thank you very much.